this is day after filming Marcy here again to welcome you to the second half of my December reading wrap-up video. So in part 1, I discussed the first 6 books I read in December, and now here in part 2, I'm going to finish up the last 6. And without further ado, here's Past Me. The next book I read was another thriller. This is All the Missing Girls. This one also struggled by being a little bit slow. This one had a more slow start and middle. It really only picked up towards the ending, and that's where my attention was. Up until nearing the climax, I was really feeling this book was a 2-star, but it did end up being a 3 out of 5 stars. I honestly don't know if it was worth it. The one thing that it does have going for it is it's like a different thriller. It starts off with this girl, Nick. She is coming back to her hometown to take care of her elderly father who's losing his memories. She also has to deal with the memories that come back because in high school, like at the end of high school, senior year, her best friend goes missing. In her friend group, there was this girl that went missing and this other girl that's still around, but she doesn't really keep in touch with her anymore. And she also has her old high school boyfriend that she's been on and off with. And there's just, in going home, there is like a lot of memories that have been resurfaced. So there's also a new lead kind of maybe into her old missing best friend, and that drags up some other memories. It kind of confused me, one, because I was listening on audiobook. I think I would have gotten this better if I was physically reading it, but you are experiencing these days backwards. So I think you start at the beginning, it's like normal chronological order, but then it skips to the very end of her visit in her hometown, and then you're slowly going back day by day by day, figuring out a bit more about how or what she was doing with her time there. For most of these days, it was pretty boring, and I didn't really care. I was speeding through it as fast as I could to get to anything that was interesting. And finally, when you reach the earlier days, stuff starts to click. And you're understanding more about, oh, this thing you learned on day like 4 really means this about days like 14 or whatever. So that part was cool, getting to really think about like, oh, with this information that we had, now we can look back at the previous parts of the book in a different light. And I think that does kind of work. But it's also kind of weird. It feels cheesy, maybe like a little cheesy, gimmicky kind of as well. I don't know if this book would have been any better if it had been told chronologically or in this order. I don't think I would have stuck with this if it wasn't in audiobook form. I enjoyed being able to do other things while listening to this, like dishes and laundry. And I don't think I would have spent my time physically reading focused just on this one. And with that, I gave it a 3 out of 5 stars. The next one is a bit different for me. This is an erotic novel. I've never read one before. I've read some romances, but this is my first specifically kinky erotic story. This was actually a book recommendation I got from watching one of Mina Reed's videos. It was beginner friendly enough for me to be interested in it and think that it might be up my alley. So I gave this one a try. It was also really short, so I was able to get through it pretty quickly, and it was fun. In this story, there are 2 women who work at an erotic hotel that gets stuck there for the night because of some massive flooding. Due to room availability, they are forced to share a room with only one bed. I know this is a popular trope in this sorts of novels, and I'm all for it. I really enjoyed this one. These 2 women had been playmates previously for a year, which in the sub-dom community meant that the woman that's not the main character, she was the dom and the main character was the sub, and although it can be sexual, for them it never was. They never had sex, but they still the dom woman spanked the sub woman, and they played together. That's not necessarily my thing. So when it did get more spicy, and it certainly did, I did enjoy that. But other parts like the spanking, whenever that came up, I just kind of like skipped a few paragraphs to get ahead of it because wasn't doing anything for me. I did enjoy the bits of romance that there was. Like I said, it's a really short book, so it's not like they had a lot of time to develop this romance, and I don't think it was really the point of this book anyway. But for what it was, I enjoyed it. I will probably be on the lookout for similar books in the future. I gave this one a 4 out of 5 stars. Oh, the next one is a big one. I had been on the waiting list for a couple months now for this book at my local library, and that is The Invisible Life of Addie Larue by V.E. Schwab. And I had heard a lot of things about this one. Most of the booktubers that I follow did really enjoy this one. There were a couple that like had slightly mixed feelings, but still overall enjoyed it. So I knew I was probably going to really enjoy this one. And ultimately I gave this one a 4 out of 5 stars. So not necessarily my favorite book, but I still really enjoyed the story. I think the only thing that really lost me was the ending. Like, as I was reading it, I didn't really have a good idea of where this story could end up, and none of the things I was imagining felt like it would have been satisfying. So the one that did end up happening, I was okay with. I think it was best for the characters involved. Well, at least one of them. But before I go further into the ending, let's talk about what this book is actually about. In this book, Addie Larue is a young woman growing up in rural France in the very early 1700s, and she's filling her days with art and strolling and just living life. She becomes friends with this like cottage witch who prays to the old gods, not necessarily like the Christian god, and Addie Larue learns from her and starts to pray to them as well. And one thing this old woman taught her was to never, ever, ever pray to the old gods after dark, because you'll never know who answers. As Addie is living her life, enjoying her single life, she does, you know, like every young woman did at the time, she got suitors. And, you know, in this tiny town, the boys she grew up with would start to look at her differently and try to wed her. So she prayed to the old gods and gave little tokens and trinkets to ask them to make them go away. So in many cases, these boys would avert their gaze and find their gaze landing on another young woman in the town. Or I think one of them died? I don't remember. This goes on for a while, but eventually she runs out of luck and time, and it's like the day of her wedding day to this guy who's been widowed and has 3 kids already, and she's not about it. She has tried so hard to get out of this situation, but she's desperate. Like on the way to the church, like she is basically being dragged by her parents. She makes an excuse to go back to the house and breaks off for the forest. And there she takes her father's ring, that he's like a woodworker, and she loves it. She's had this trinket for years. It's her favorite possession, and she buries it into the dirt and prays for escape. She doesn't realize that the sun had just set, so she does get an answer, but it's from the darkness, the god that she's, you know, not supposed to interact with. And basically he does grant her wish of freedom, but because he's a bit of a trickster, he kind of curses her at the same time. So Addie is free from the life that she was dreading, because anytime that she meets a person, it'll be as if they had never met before. And the moment that a door closes between them, or they go around a corner or something like that, they will forget about her. And if they see her again, they're going to be starting again from, you know, not knowing her at all. So this means her parents and everyone in town has no memory of her. They never thought they had a daughter. As you can imagine, it makes living life pretty difficult. We get a few different timelines. First is the first few years where she's learning how to deal with this curse and how to survive. Because technically she doesn't need food to live, but she does still feel those extreme hunger pains. She still feels cold, even though she does never freeze to death. And during this whole time, the darkness god is also trying to force her to give up her soul, be tired of the life that she has been cursed to live, and just give up her soul to him. But she's stubborn and will not do that. And eventually their relationship turns less of foes to maybe kind of friends to maybe lovers. Like I said before, I wasn't super into the ending, but I understand why V.E. Schwab would choose to end the story this way. And ultimately, it was satisfying. I gave this one a 4 out of 5 stars. The next book on my list is a graphic novel. This is the second book in the series. It is The Adventure Zone, A Murder on the Rockport Limited. So if you don't know this series at all, it is a story based on a podcast. So the podcast is titled The Adventure Zone, and this story arc is from the first story arc that they did on the podcast that they titled Balance. Maybe you know them, the McElroy brothers. They are the ones that made this podcast. It's 3 brothers and their dad. It is such a fun story, and I love the characters of Magnus, Taco, and Merle. Reading through this graphic novel reminded me all of the fun stuff that they did in the podcast, and having that connection to the podcast made me really enjoy this book. Even taking away that context, I still think that this is a good story. Obviously, I would recommend starting with book 1. This graphic novel series is still standalone pretty good. I think the illustration style and the choices for the characters were really, really cool. In this specific novel, the 3 main characters are on a train for a murder mystery, and I think it was really fun. There's crabs, there's a mystery room, there's a decapitation. It's fun. It's a really fun time. I ended up giving a 5 out of 5 stars. I'm probably a little biased, but on to my last 2. So I read these 2. I hadn't planned on reading them at all, but I was reading the Heartstopper series online, and it's technically in the middle of like volume 4, but volume 4 isn't completely finished. It's coming out like in chapters online. So I'm in the middle of reading that, and I come across Alice Oseman's calendar, her timeline of the story progression. So I figured out that in the middle of volume 4 of Heartstopper, the graphic novel with Nick and Charlie, 2 novels and novellas happen. So one of them is This Winter. That's the first one I read. And the other one is Solitaire. But first, going to This Winter. So This Winter is a novella, and it is very short. I think I only read it in like a day. This one focuses on Christmas Day. Without getting too far into spoilers, let's just say for Charlie and his family, this Christmas is a rough one. Charlie has been working through some mental health issues and, eating disorder related things. So Christmas, a holiday that is greatly revolving around food, is to be expected rough. And this is also the first time that Charlie sees his aunts and uncles and cousins and grandparents for the first time since he's gone to the mental health hospital, and they're not super understanding. They don't really understand how to interact with him without being rude. We get 3 different viewpoints for each of the children in the family. So first is Charlie and having to deal with all of this on Christmas, just wanting it to be normal, but knowing that because of these circumstances, it just can't be. And then the second viewpoint is his older sister, Tori, who is doing her absolute best to help her brother through this. She loves him to pieces. She has his back completely. And she's kind of the only one in the whole family who really gets it. Even his parents are struggling to figure out how best to support him. So she is just doing her absolute best, but still not being enough, because she's only one person in a room of a dozen. It gets to her as well. She's dealing with her own problems at the same time, but still putting that aside to focus helping Charlie. Originally when I read it, I gave it a 3 out of 5 stars. I might end up bumping it up to 4 out of 5. because of the subject matter, it was understandably hard to get through. And I read this right around Christmas time, so I was kind of hoping for it to be more festive. So when it wasn't that, I was kind of taken aback and had to reframe my thoughts about this book. Understanding what it is and what it's trying to do, I would probably bump it up to a 4 out of 5, but for now, unless I give it more thought and maybe reread it, I'm gonna stick with a 3 out of 5 stars. Okay, last book of the month, another surprise add to my TBR. This one, like I said, was Solitaire by Alice Oseman. Most of the other things I've read by her are focused on the Nick and Charlie story, but this one is focused mostly on Tori, Charlie's older sister. So like I mentioned, she is also going through some stuff. So Solitaire takes place in like February, January, following that really rough Christmas. When I first started reading this, I was kind of shocked to find out just how much of a misanthrope Tori actually is. Because in the snippets that you see of her in Heartstopper and This Winter, she just seems like a slightly moody teenager who is still a good person and really supportive of her brother. But until now, you don't see that she's probably depressed and could probably use some therapy and just support. I think she doesn't fully understand that what she's feeling and what she's going through isn't necessarily normal for a teenager. So anyway, that's where we start. And she is dealing with this new blog that pops up surrounding her school. So it seems to be sort of like a prank blog. It's titled Solitaire, and it seems to be wanting to bring joy to the students of Higgs by creating havoc in the school. So they've done this, whoever is behind Solitaire has pulled pranks at school assemblies, or changing the intercom system to always be blasting a song constantly all day. Mostly harmless stuff, and it somehow is tied back to Tori, and she meets another guy. He's a weirdo. She hears from Nick and Charlie, who had classes with him at the boys' school. No one really likes him. He doesn't seem to have any friends, and eventually Tori and Michael do actually become real friends, and it's really cute, and I really liked that progression. I'm really hoping to see if more of it ends up in either Heartstopper or maybe even a different novel. I have no idea. I haven't read all of them yet, but I do really recommend it. As cringy as it is at times, I think it did do a pretty good job at depicting this specific view of high school and how much it can suck. I would recommend Solitaire. I gave this one a 4 out of 5 stars. I am really excited by how much I was able to get into this month, and I'm hoping to be able to fit a similar amount into January, even though I don't have that Christmas to New Year's break that I took off this year. But that's okay. I hope you had fun listening to me ramble about books, and I hope to see you in my next video next Thursday. I post every Thursday, every week so far. And if you liked this video, please like below, and if you really liked it and liked some other of my videos, I highly recommend you consider subscribing to my channel. I would greatly appreciate it. I hope you all have a lovely week and get some good reading done if you want. I will see you in the next one.